Tonight, divine peace touches every place in your mind where silence has been missing. When the weight of the night settles upon your thoughts and the noise within you refuses to fade, a grace greater than your unrest begins to move toward you. In this moment, a promise unfolds. What has felt tangled in your mind will be gently loosened, and what has been restless in your heart will find a path towards stillness. The peace you have searched for in your own strength now approaches through the intercession of Saint Michael Archangel, who stands as a living sign of God's protection, order, and clarity. As you listen, a quiet transformation begins, not through emotional force or sudden intensity, but through a slow and steady descent into spiritual calm. Every word becomes a step into a sanctuary where anxiety loses its foundation and where fear is unable to take root. The one who created you breathes serenity over what has been disturbed, and the archangel entrusted with defending God's people guards your mind as a shield of light. Nothing in this hour stands above the strength of divine peace, and nothing within you is too chaotic to be reached by the healing that God sends through his heavenly defender. As the shadows of the day retreat, a sacred silence stretches toward your soul, preparing you for the prayer that will guide you into rest. This introduction opens a door through which you may step into a space where sleep becomes not a battle, but a grace received. In the presence of Saint Michael, the burdens of the day loosen their grip, and a deeper clarity rises to take their place, assuring you that the night is no longer a place of worry, but a passage into restoration. What unfolds next is not merely a moment of devotion, but a journey into the quiet certainty that God restores those who seek refuge in Him. The prayer of healing and inner stillness. Saint Michael Archangel, enter this moment with the strength and clarity that come from God alone, and stand beside me as I open my heart in this hour when rest feels distant and peace seems out of reach. Guard my mind from every disturbance that rises without warning. Remove from within me every trace of fear, worry, and confusion that steals the serenity my spirit longs to receive. Bring your heavenly protection into the hidden places where anxious thoughts tighten and multiply, and allow your light to quiet the noise that has taken hold of my inner silence. Lift from me every weight that presses upon my mind and every burden that I struggle to carry on my own. Let your presence form a shield around my thoughts so that only what comes from God may remain. Strengthen me with the firmness of your faith so that I may rest in the certainty that divine peace is stronger than any shadow that approaches in the night. Guide me toward the calm that only heaven can offer, and let your intercession open a path through which God may touch the places in me that have been troubled for too long. Bring order where my thoughts have been scattered. Bring stillness where agitation has taken root. Bring clarity where worry has obscured the truth of God's love for me. In this hour, soften the tension that has gathered in my heart. Let every breath become an invitation for the peace of Christ to settle upon me. Quiet the memories that return without mercy. Silence the voices of fear that speak without rest, and steady the emotions that have become overwhelming. Stand guard over my sleep, protect me from every spiritual disturbance, and watch over my soul as a faithful defender of God's children. Let your light surround me now, holding back every influence that does not belong to God. Allow my thoughts to slow, my spirit to settle, and my mind to release the battles it cannot resolve alone. Lead me gently into the rest that God desires for me, and let sleep come not as an escape, but as a blessing that renews my strength. In your protection, Saint Michael, may my heart find healing, may my mind find peace, and may my soul embrace the quiet trust that opens the way to deep and restorative sleep. How Saint Michael breaks the invisible battles of the night. When the night becomes a place where thoughts grow heavier and silence seems to magnify every hidden tension, the presence of Saint Michael Archangel reveals a truth that many hearts forget. Not all battles are visible, yet none of them are beyond the reach of divine protection. The struggles that surface when the world grows quiet often rise from fears that have gone unnamed and from worries that have lingered without resolution. In these hours, the mind becomes vulnerable and the heart feels exposed, as if the absence of daylight invites anxieties to speak more loudly. It is precisely in this passage between wakefulness and rest that Saint Michael exercises his mission with profound tenderness and unshakable authority. His role entrusted by God is not limited to defending against external dangers. It extends into the interior landscape where unseen burdens accumulate. When agitation spreads within the mind and the soul feels disturbed by thoughts that refuse to settle, the Archangel steps forward as a defender who understands the quiet battles that unfold within the human heart. Scripture reveals how God sends his angels to minister to his people, and Saint Michael, in a particular way, embodies the victory of divine order over the chaos that seeks to disrupt peace. The same heavenly strength that cast out evil in the first rebellion now guards the believer who feels overwhelmed by the weight of a restless night. In these moments, Saint Michael does not act with force that overwhelms the soul. Instead, he brings a clarity that cuts through confusion and a firmness that steadies the interior world. His protection creates a boundary in the spiritual realm, separating what belongs to God from what seeks to disturb the believer. Where fear has spread without permission, he establishes calm. Where anxious thoughts rise unrestrained, he anchors the heart in truth. Where emotional unrest clouds perception, he restores the memory of God's nearness. This work is not merely symbolic, it is deeply spiritual. As the believer listens and opens the heart in prayer, the Archangel's presence begins to dissolve the patterns of interior struggle that have made rest feel impossible. He breaks the movements of fear that unsettle the mind, interrupts the inner dialogue that drains strength, and silences the disturbances that attempt to steal peace. His intercession is a reminder that the night does not belong to anxiety. It belongs to the one who created rest, renewal, and silence as gifts for the human soul. And as these truths take root, the path toward deeper peace begins to unfold, preparing the heart for what comes next. The mind's cry for rest and the grace that answers. There are hours in the night when the mind no longer responds to reason, and the heart feels unable to slow its own rhythm. Thoughts spin without direction, memories return without being invited, and worries take on a weight they did not carry in the daylight. In these moments, many people blame themselves for not being stronger or calmer, as if restlessness were a personal failure. Yet, in the light of faith, the restlessness that rises during the night is not a sign of spiritual weakness. It is a sign that the soul is crying out for a grace it cannot create on its own. It is a cry for shelter, clarity, and peace, and God never ignores such a cry. The human mind was not created to carry endless tension without relief. It was created with limits that protect the heart from overload. When those limits are crossed, the mind signals its exhaustion not through silence but through agitation. It is the soul's way of saying that something deeper requires attention, healing, or spiritual support. In the stillness of night, when distractions fall away, these needs rise to the surface, often feeling larger than they are. Yet this rising is also an invitation, a way in which the soul reaches toward the presence of God, even when words fail. Grace begins its work precisely here, where the mind trembles and the heart feels unsettled. God sends his angels not only to protect, but to restore, and Saint Michael plays a unique role in this restoration. His presence does not erase the struggle instantly, but it brings order to what has been scattered. He stands at the threshold of the mind like a guardian who allows only truth to remain. In the same way that he defended heaven from the rebellion that sought to corrupt its harmony, he now defends the believer from thoughts that disturb interior peace. His mission is rooted in divine will. and his strength reflects the power of God, not his own. When he steps into the unrest of the human mind, he brings not noise, but clarity, not pressure, but relief, not fear, but an unwavering reminder that the believer is not abandoned in the struggle. There is a grace that answers the cry for rest, and it does not depend on emotion. It depends on openness. When the believer listens with sincerity, the heart begins to loosen its hold on anxieties that were never meant to be carried alone. The mind begins to understand that it does not need to fight every thought, nor does it need to resolve every concern before sleep. The presence of Saint Michael allows the believer to see the difference between the burdens that must be carried and those that must be released. In this clarity, tension begins to ease. This work of grace often unfolds slowly, like the gradual quieting of a storm. At first, the winds of thought may still roar, but as grace takes its place, the intensity begins to fade. The heart begins to trust that rest is possible, even if it has not yet arrived. The mind begins to sense that peace is not something it must create. It is something God gives when the soul lifts its struggle into his hands. The night becomes less threatening when the believer realizes that sleeplessness does not mean spiritual failure. It means the soul is seeking a place to rest securely, and God is responding through his holy protector. Saint Michael's presence teaches the believer to recognize that interior peace does not come from fighting thoughts, but from surrendering them. It comes from allowing divine light to reach the places where fear has grown. It comes from understanding that the mind's cry for rest is also a prayer, even when no words are spoken. God reads the heart more deeply than the believer can understand, and he sends help even before the soul realizes what it needs. The Archangel's role in this help is not only defensive, it is deeply healing. He prepares the mind to receive the grace that God is already offering. As the spiritual reality behind restlessness becomes clearer, the believer discovers that the night, once feared, can become sacred ground. In this space, hidden wounds surface not to torment, but to be healed. Old fears rise not to overwhelm, but to be surrendered. Thoughts race not to punish, but to invite the soul into a moment of deeper trust. The grace that responds to this cry is not distant. It is immediate, steady, and faithful. It reaches toward the believer with the same tenderness that God has shown throughout salvation history. It is the grace that calms storms, lifts burdens, and prepares the heart for the peace that follows. When Saint Michael stands beside the believer, the mind begins to remember that rest is not earned, it is received. Peace is not forced, it grows. Healing is not hurried. It unfolds through divine timing. And as these truths settle, the heart opens to the possibility that what felt impossible moments earlier is now within reach. The night becomes a doorway to renewal, not a threat to be feared. In this understanding, the believer moves closer to the rest that God desires, supported by the Archangel who ensures that no silent battle is fought alone. Learning to surrender the battles you cannot see. There are struggles that rise within the human heart that cannot be solved through intellect, effort, or emotional discipline. These battles form quietly, often without clear origin, and they grow in strength during the hours when the mind is most vulnerable. Many people attempt to fight these invisible conflicts alone, believing that with enough determination they can silence every fear, resolve every concern, and calm every disturbance. Yet this expectation becomes a source of deeper exhaustion. The spiritual life teaches that some battles were never meant to be fought in isolation. They belong to God, and they require the intervention of his heavenly servants. Among them, Saint Michael Archangel stands with unique authority. As the defender who enters the hidden terrain of spiritual conflict and carries what the human heart cannot bear. Surrender is not an escape from responsibility. It is a recognition of divine order. It is the moment when the believer admits that interior peace cannot be manufactured by force, and that the soul must yield to the protection God has already placed around it. In Scripture, trust is not presented as passive resignation, but as a profound act of faith. When Jesus speaks of peace in John chapter 14, verse 27, he reveals that the peace he gives is unlike the peace the world offers. It is not produced through effort, it is received through trust. This trust opens the door for the angels to exercise the missions entrusted to them. Saint Michael, in particular, responds when the believer releases the illusion of control and allows God to act where human strength reaches its end. To surrender is to acknowledge that the mind's unrest is not always rooted in external circumstances. Sometimes the deeper cause is spiritual. Unresolved wounds, accumulated fears, long-held concerns, or subtle influences that cloud perception. These burdens shape the heart in ways the believer cannot always recognize. They affect thought patterns, emotional responses, and the ability to enter rest. When these forces rise, the temptation is to resist harder, to think more intensely, to seek solutions through sheer mental effort. Yet this resistance often amplifies the struggle. The more the mind tries to overpower its own turmoil, the more deeply that turmoil embeds itself. Saint Michael teaches a different way. His mission is rooted in obedience to God, not in self-sufficiency. When he confronted the rebellion described in Revelation, his victory did not come from personal power. It came from his submission to the divine will. He speaks the words, "Who is like God?" not as a declaration of superiority, but as a confession of truth. This truth forms the foundation of all spiritual surrender. When the believer echoes this interiorly, acknowledging that God alone holds authority over every visible and invisible force, the battles that once seemed overwhelming begin to lose their grip. Surrender becomes an act of aligning the heart with the order of heaven. This act has profound spiritual consequence. When the believer stops fighting the wrong battles, Saint Michael can take his rightful place as protector. He stands between the soul and the forces that seek to disturb it. He breaks the movements of fear that tighten the mind. He disperses the heaviness that settles in the heart. He pushes back the influences that attempt to enter the interior world through vulnerability. His intervention is not dramatic. It is steady, dignified, and deeply effective. He shields what the believer does not have the strength to shield alone. Surrender also transforms the way the believer views rest. Instead of treating sleep as a battlefield where the mind must win its own peace, surrender allows sleep to be restored to its true purpose, a sacred time of renewal. In Psalm 4 verse 8, the psalmist proclaims that it is God who makes the believer dwell in safety. This safety is not merely physical, it is spiritual. When Saint Michael guards the night, the soul is invited to lay down its burdens with confidence. Rest becomes an extension of faith, not a test of strength. The heart gradually learns that it does not need to resolve every concern before sleep. It needs only to entrust what remains unresolved into the care of God. The process of surrender often feels unfamiliar at first. Letting go can seem unnatural to a heart accustomed to carrying its own weight. Yet with each moment of openness, the interior tension begins to dissolve. The mind loosens its hold on the worries that once dominated its attention. The emotions anchored in fear begin to soften. The soul feels the difference between striving and receiving. Saint Michael becomes not only a defender, but a guide, teaching the believer how to rest in divine protection rather than in personal effort. This chapter of surrender leads the way toward spiritual maturity. It opens the heart to grace. It teaches the believer that divine help is not distant, but active, especially in the hidden battles that unfold in silence. When the soul begins to understand this, the night loses its threat. The unseen becomes less frightening. The interior world becomes a place where God can work without obstruction. In this clarity, the believer moves toward a deeper healing. Sleep, once disrupted by turmoil, becomes a possibility again, not because the mind has conquered its unrest, but because the heart has learned to trust what it cannot see. The gentle descent into spiritual peace. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when the heart realizes that peace is not something forced into existence. It is something received. Peace arrives gradually, with a quiet strength that does not overwhelm, but invites. This gentle descent into spiritual calm unfolds when the soul finally accepts that rest is not earned through control or discipline, but granted through openness to God's presence. When Saint Michael the Archangel stands near, this descent becomes even more profound, for he prepares the inner world to welcome the peace that flows only from divine grace. In this chapter, the believer begins to understand that interior stillness is not an escape from reality, but a return to the truth of who they are in God's sight. The path into peace begins with recognition. The mind has limits, and when those limits are reached, the soul seeks a deeper refuge. Many people attempt to slow their thoughts through concentration or effort, yet these methods often heighten agitation. Silence cannot be commanded. It must be entered gradually. Peace is not an object that the will can grasp. It is a spiritual condition shaped by trust, humility, and surrender. This is why Saint Michael's intercession is essential. He does not impose silence upon the mind. Instead, he clears the spiritual space necessary for silence to take root. He removes the subtle pressures that tighten the heart, disperses the influences that cloud perception, and steadies the emotions that rise without invitation. The gentle descent into peace often begins in the body, even before it reaches the mind. As the believer listens to prayer and opens the heart to God's action, breathing slows. Muscles release tension. A quiet awareness enters the body, signaling that the soul is finally allowed to rest. This physical softening is not merely biological. It reflects a spiritual truth. The human person is not divided between body and soul. Both are touched by grace. In moments of prayer, Saint Michael guards this process, ensuring that the believer is not pulled back into agitation before peace takes root. His protection forms a barrier around the heart, allowing the interior world to reorganize under the influence of divine order rather than fear. As this descent continues, thoughts begin to lose their urgency. Concerns that once seemed immediate start to appear in their true proportion. Worries that pressed heavily on the mind begin to loosen, not because they have been resolved, but because the soul no longer carries them alone. This shift marks one of the deepest movements of grace. The realization that God's presence does not remove every difficulty, but transforms the way the heart responds to them. Saint Michael strengthens this transformation. He helps the believer distinguish between the thoughts that require attention and the ones that only drain peace. He sharpens spiritual perception, allowing the soul to rest in truth rather than be dragged into anxiety by illusions. In this space, peace grows slowly, like dawn emerging through the horizon. It does not rush, it does not startle, it moves with purpose. This pace teaches the believer that spiritual healing unfolds according to divine timing. The mind learns to trust the rhythm of God rather than the pressure of fear. The gentle descent is a process of alignment. The heart aligns with heaven, the mind aligns with truth, and the soul aligns with the one who created rest as a gift, not a burden. Psalm 131 describes the soul as a child that has been calmed and quieted. This image captures the essence of spiritual peace, a trusting stillness in the arms of God. Saint Michael's role is to guide the believer into this posture of trust, ensuring that nothing disrupts the movement toward interior rest. One of the most profound changes that occurs in this descent is the shift from internal resistance to acceptance. Many people cling to their worries as if releasing them would expose them to harm. Yet in the realm of faith, releasing fear creates the very space where God's peace can enter. Saint Michael teaches the believer to let go without fear, reminding them that divine protection surrounds them even in their most vulnerable moments. He directs the heart away from self-reliance and toward confidence in God's strength. This transition marks a milestone in the spiritual life, the moment when the believer recognizes that true peace is not fragile. It is sustained by heaven itself. As peace deepens, the believer begins to notice a subtle clarity emerging. Thoughts become more organized. Emotions lose their sharpness. The heart senses a spiritual order, replacing the inner chaos that once seemed immovable. This clarity is not intellectual. It is relational. It comes from resting in God's presence, trusting that He sees every part of the interior world and responds with wisdom and compassion. Saint Michael reinforces this clarity by defending the soul from disturbances that attempt to pull it back into unrest. His vigilance allows peace to settle without interruption, much like a guardian standing watch at the gate of the heart. By the time this gentle descent reaches its fullness, the believer no longer feels the need to force sleep. Rest comes naturally, as a consequence of surrender and trust. The night transforms into a sanctuary rather than a place of fear. The mind no longer resists silence, because silence is no longer threatening. It is healing. In this state, the believer discovers that peace was never distant. It had been waiting beneath the noise, ready to rise once the soul made room for God's presence. This chapter prepares the way for a deeper understanding of the night, not as a time of vulnerability, but as an opportunity for renewal under the protection of Saint Michael. The night as a place of renewal, not fear. For many people, night has become a time of unease rather than rest. Darkness carries associations of vulnerability, silence heightens awareness of internal tension, and the absence of activity forces the mind to confront what it successfully ignored during the day. Yet in the spiritual tradition of the Church, night has never been a place of threat. It is a sacred threshold where God restores the weary, renews strength, and prepares the soul for the light of a new day. When Saint Michael Archangel stands guard, the meaning of night becomes even clearer. It is not a landscape of fear, but a space where divine grace works with extraordinary depth. This chapter leads the believer into a renewed understanding of night as a time marked not by danger, but by God's faithful presence. Night reveals truths that daylight often conceals. In the absence of noise, the interior world rises to the surface. Worries that were dim during the day become more visible. Fears take on greater weight. Thoughts expand in shadowed spaces, creating the illusion that the mind is under attack simply because it has become quiet. Yet Scripture repeatedly shows that God moves powerfully in the night. In Genesis, God speaks to His servants through dreams. In Exodus, He leads His people through the darkness with pillars of cloud and fire. In the Gospel accounts, Jesus rises before dawn to pray in silence. Throughout salvation history, the night is presented not as an enemy, but as a setting where God works intimately in the depths of the human heart. Saint Michael's role in this context is profound. As the leader of the heavenly armies, he embodies God's justice and protection. His presence during the night does not imply that the believer is in danger. Rather, it signifies that God cares about the interior battles that often intensify in darkness. Saint Michael stands at the boundary where fear attempts to enter the mind. He shields the believer from disturbances that try to gain influence when the heart is tired and vulnerable. His vigilance ensures that the night remains a place where God's healing can unfold without interference. This understanding reframes the entire experience of nighttime. Instead of viewing it as an hour of spiritual exposure, the believer begins to see it as a sacred pause. an opening through which divine grace enters gently and restores what the day has worn down. The renewal that occurs at night is subtle but powerful. When the believer chooses to trust rather than resist, the night becomes an intimate sanctuary where God touches what has been wounded. This renewal often begins with the simple act of acknowledging that rest is a divine gift. Psalm 127 declares that God gives sleep to his beloved. This sleep is not merely physical recovery, it is spiritual restoration. It is God's way of returning strength to the soul, clarifying the mind, and resetting the emotional landscape. When Saint Michael guards the heart, this renewal deepens. The believer is freed from the distractions that impede rest and protected from the spiritual agitation that attempts to disrupt healing. Under the Archangel's protection, the night becomes fertile ground for transformation. To experience night as renewal requires a shift in perception. Many resist the quiet because silence exposes the weight they are carrying. Yet this exposure is not meant to harm. It is meant to heal. The night reveals what needs grace. It illuminates the interior wounds that daylight conceals through constant activity. When these wounds rise to the surface, the believer may initially feel overwhelmed. But this is precisely when Saint Michael steps forward as defender and guide. He stands by the believer, ensuring that what surfaces does so under God's protection, never outside of it. This means that the believer is safe even in moments of vulnerability. What feels like emotional fragility is often the beginning of spiritual renewal. Saint Michael's presence also teaches the believer to slow down and allow God to work in silence. Many people fear stillness because they equate it with emptiness. But spiritual stillness is not empty. It is full of grace. The night provides the conditions for this stillness to take root, reduce distractions, softened physical senses, and a natural slowing of the body's rhythm. When combined with prayer and surrender, this environment creates the perfect setting for divine renewal. Saint Michael protects this setting so that the believer can rest without fear. He removes influences that disturb peace, guards the mind from intrusive thoughts, and preserves the interior freedom needed for healing to unfold. What makes the night uniquely powerful is that renewal often happens without the believer's awareness. Just as the body heals during sleep without conscious effort, the soul also undergoes restoration during moments of spiritual rest. This is the mystery of divine grace. God works in ways unseen, accomplishing what the believer cannot achieve alone. Saint Michael's protection ensures that this unseen work is not disrupted. He stands watch, just as he stood watch over heaven in the moment of rebellion, ensuring that divine order prevails where disorder once sought to enter. In this way, the believer discovers that night is not a threat but a promise, the promise of restoration that unfolds in the hands of God. As this understanding deepens, fear loses its power. The believer begins to look at nighttime not with dread, but with expectancy. The night becomes a space of encounter rather than escape, a time when the heart opens itself to God in ways that daylight rarely permits. Sleep becomes a form of trust, and silence becomes an invitation. Under the protection of Saint Michael, the believer learns that every night carries a quiet grace capable of renewing the mind, restoring the heart, and preparing the soul for the day that will come. The night becomes a reminder that God works most tenderly in the hours when the world grows still. This chapter prepares the heart for the final truth. When Saint Michael stands guard, the believer does not enter the night alone. They enter it under divine protection, wrapped in a peace that transforms rest into a spiritual gift. When Saint Michael stands guard, your heart can finally sleep. When a person reaches the point where exhaustion outweighs clarity, where thoughts twist themselves into knots, and where the night stretches endlessly without promise of rest, a profound truth becomes essential for spiritual survival. The human heart was never meant to face the night alone. The presence of Saint Michael Archangel reveals this truth with transforming clarity. When he stands guard, the restless heart discovers that it no longer needs to fight for peace. It only needs to receive it. This final chapter leads the believer into the deepest understanding of rest. Rest that does not come from the absence of struggle, but from the certainty of divine protection. The inability to sleep often arises from a sense of insecurity, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. The mind fears letting go because it does not feel safe enough to release control. In the quiet of night, it imagines every possibility, examines every worry, and tries to prevent every harm. Yet this vigilance, which the mind believes will protect it, actually deepens agitation. The heart cannot rest when it believes it must defend itself. Here lies the reason why Saint Michael's presence brings such profound comfort. As the leader of God's heavenly host, he embodies divine guardianship. His mission is not symbolic. It is real, rooted in God's will, and exercised with unwavering fidelity. When he stands beside the believer, the interior world shifts from fear to trust. The heart understands, even before words form, that it no longer stands unprotected. This truth echoes throughout Scripture. In Psalm 91, the believer is assured that God's angels are commanded to guard his children in all their ways. This guardianship is not limited to moments of danger. It extends into the silent hours when anxiety tries to take root. Saint Michael stands among these guardians with a unique authority, carrying out the divine order that no fear, no darkness, and no spiritual influence may overcome the child who seeks refuge under God's protection. When the believer internalizes this reality, the grip of fear loosens. Instead of resisting rest, the heart begins to yield to it. This yielding is not fragility, it is the strength of trust. The presence of Saint Michael also reshapes the meaning of vulnerability. Many people associate vulnerability with danger, believing that lowering their guard exposes them to harm. Yet in the spiritual life, vulnerability before God becomes the doorway to healing. When the believer acknowledges their limits and releases control, divine grace flows more freely. Saint Michael safeguards this vulnerability, ensuring that what is yielded does not become exploited by fear. His protection creates a sacred space where the soul can rest without defending itself, where the mind can cease its endless vigilance, and where the heart can open without fear of being overwhelmed. This sacred space becomes the threshold through which sleep can finally enter. When Saint Michael watches over the believer, the night becomes structured not by fear, but by order, divine order. This order calms the emotional storms that rise without warning. It steadies the spiritual atmosphere around the mind. It anchors the heart in truth, lifting it out of the illusions that nighttime often amplifies. The Archangel's presence restores balance. He removes disturbances that attempt to disrupt rest, shields the soul from influences that increase anxiety, and guides the believer toward a peace that is not dependent on circumstances. Under this protection, the mind no longer feels obligated to solve every problem before sleep. It understands that rest is not an escape from responsibility, but an act of entrusting everything into God's hands. In this trust, something extraordinary occurs. Sleep becomes prayer. The act of surrendering the mind, the heart, and the body into rest becomes an offering to God, a confession of His sovereignty and care. Each breath taken in calmness becomes a silent acknowledgement that divine protection is stronger than any unseen threat. Each moment of stillness testifies to the truth that God renews His children not only through daylight and activity, but through sleep and silence as well. The believer begins to understand that rest is not passive. It is sacramental in nature, an outward expression of the inward grace that God bestows upon those who trust in Him. This transformation deepens when the believer reflects on the mission entrusted to Saint Michael. His cry, "Who is like God?" echoes into the interior world. It exposes the false belief that the heart must guard itself. It reveals the deeper truth that God alone is protector, healer, and source of peace. When this truth settles in the soul, every form of nighttime fear loses its foundation. The believer begins to view rest not as a vulnerability, but as a participation in divine providence. They sleep because God watches. They rest because Saint Michael stands at the threshold of their thoughts. They release control because heaven holds what they cannot. This spiritual awakening changes everything. The night no longer appears threatening. Darkness feels less oppressive. Silence becomes a companion rather than an enemy. The heart, once restless, learns the rhythm of trust. It discovers that sleep comes more naturally when the mind no longer feels responsible for guarding itself. Under Saint Michael's protection, the believer rests in the truth proclaimed throughout Scripture. God neither sleeps nor slumbers. Because God remains awake, the believer is free to sleep. Because Saint Michael stands guard, the believer is free to let go. Because divine protection is unbroken, rest becomes safe again. As this chapter reaches its fullness, a final understanding emerges. Spiritual peace does not come from the removal of every burden. It comes from the certainty that none of those burdens are carried alone. When the believer embraces this certainty, sleep no longer feels distant. It becomes the natural consequence of trust. The night becomes a sanctuary where the heart can breathe freely, where the mind can soften its grip, and where the soul can rest in the gentle care of God. Under the watch of Saint Michael Archangel, the believer discovers that the deepest form of rest is not merely physical, it is spiritual. It is the rest of knowing that heaven is near, protection is real, and peace is stronger than fear.